So again, welcome everyone to the 2023 predictions discussion. I'm Susanne Herring from DiploFoundation. Every January, we try to see what's ahead of us for the rest of the year. And for the
recording in progress.
For the last 13 years, Professor Jovan Kurbalja, director of Diplo, has prepared a prediction text, which is followed by an online discussion, the one that we're having right now. And here we are today. Now, next up, in a few minutes, I'll invite Jovan to moderate the prediction conversation. But before I pass the floor on to him, I'd like to introduce our lead discussants today. And once we have them on our screen, yes. So I'll start with Mr. Wolfgang Kleinwächter, professor of internet governance, who will give us his gist of 2023 from his outlook that he has published yesterday. Mr. Asoke Mukerji, former Indian ambassador, he will be reflecting on the important role India will play in digital 2023 as host of two important processes, the G20 and the Shanghai Cooperation Council. Ms. Marilia Maciel, internet governance expert from Brazil, who will speak more on Brazil's return to global digital politics and IBSA's digital momentum. And IBSA stands for India, Brazil, and South Africa. And then we have Ms. Katherine Getao, leading cybersecurity expert from Kenya. She will be telling us all about digital and cyber trends in Africa. We have Mr. Richard Burley, Blik EU correspondent, and he will be reflecting on the EU's digital dynamics for 2023. Looking forward to that. And finally, Mr. Rodney Taylor, Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunication Union. He will be bringing us digital governance perspectives from the Caribbean and other small island states. And as Diplo's tradition, we always try to have the most interactive discussions, whether it's in situ or online or hybrid. So we have our very own Ginger and Katherine as our chat moderators. So please, at any point during the discussion, feel free to ask questions or make your comments through the Zoom chat, and they will be addressed by Ginger, Katherine, and myself. And another note about the schedule of the event is after the prediction webinar, we will have an extra 30 minutes for anyone who wants to delve deeper on the subjects that we will start discussing in a bit with our panelists, with Diplo experts and AI predictions. And I will let you know more about this at the end of the webinar, which will take an hour. And now, finally, let's see what digital trends and predictions we have lying ahead of us for 2023. Jovan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Susanne. Happy New Year. Best wishes to all of you, your families, the organization, and to all of us as a humanity in the time which is not simple and not easy. Somebody call it as a perm crisis or permanent crisis era. In order to kick off discussion, I will just reflect on 3 points from the 12 points prediction for this year, which I published last week. And then we'll pass to our lead discussant and panelists, reflecting on various aspects from their regional, professional, and other perspectives. The first point, which is important, is so-called revisiting of the 1998 deals. Sometimes we forget that there is a bit of long history of digital governance, and it is exactly 1998, where most of the current arrangement for the digital governance and cooperation were set in motion. In September 1998, Google was established. Again, in the same month, ICANN, International Corporation for Assigned Numbers and Names and Numbers, was established. WTO introduced e-commerce agenda. In November, at that time, the kickoff of the cybersecurity declaration negotiation at the UN was made with the Russian a resolution which was later on adopted by the General Assembly. In November 1998, we had ITU Minneapolis Plenipotentiary, where the decision was made to organize World Summit on Information Society and Internet Governance Forum and other bodies. If you analyze what is happening currently, you will see that exactly that structure was set in motion 25 years ago. The technology is moving fast, but technology governance is rather slow in evolution, much slower than technology. I think, generally speaking, for the good reason. But we are now speaking about completely different world 25 years later, with geopolitical aspects of the digital governance, with almost 60% of global population connected. Therefore, it is right time to discuss possible revisiting of the 1998 deals. The second point in this context is what I labeled that as IPSA momentum. IPSA momentum relates to India, Brazil, South Africa. 3 countries which will be in the leadership of G20. India is this year, Brazil is next year, and in 2025 is South Africa. 3 countries which are democracies, functional democracies, which are developing economies, and strong supporters of the diplomacy and multilateral diplomacy. Therefore, 3 Ds for IPSA countries. An interesting momentum when there are tensions between China, United States, and other actors. And third point, which I would like to highlight, is centrality of data governance negotiations. India already marked importance of data for their presidency of G20. Japan is positioning itself probably with the IGF of discussion on data. In the WTO, negotiation on e-commerce data is central, not to speak about Brussels, European Union, centrality of GDPR and data and other issues. Therefore, 3 points: revisiting 1998 deals, second, IPSA momentum, and third, data governance. That's from my side. Now, I'm really honored and pleased to kick off the discussion with the comments from Wolfgang. Those of you who are new to this field, I just would like to introduce Wolfgang as a key contributor, academic and practical, to the discussions. And he, like me, he's publishing every year outlook for 2023. Now, it's a long document, very in-depth, and I advise everybody to consult this fantastic contribution by Wolfgang. And I asked Wolfgang to do almost a mission impossible, to summarize in 5 minutes his outlook for this year. Wolfgang, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jovan. And it's really great to see your approach, that you remember 1998, a quarter of a century ago, and you are absolutely right that basic structures has been established 25 years ago, and we are still living from the input we got 25 years ago. The big differences between 1998 and 2023 is that 25 years ago, Internet governance was seen more as a technical issue with some political implications. But today, all Internet, cyber, digital issues are political issues with a technical component. So this is now all the issues which were discussed 25 years ago in a smaller community are now in the center of global diplomacy, of global policy making, of global conflicts, as we see in the Ukraine war and in other confrontational spheres around the globe. What I've seen over the 25 years, so I was involved in the making of ICANN 25 years ago and followed this Minneapolis versus Cambridge debate, which produced then for a lot of years the ICANN ITU controversy, is that we have more or less a schizophrenic situation. That on the one hand, so we see a huge progress in promotion of digital cooperation, where people realize digital development is good for economic growth to bring people out of poverty. There are a lot of success stories in bridging the digital divide. We have now 5 billion internet users, even if 3 billion are still offline. But this is much more than people expected 25 years ago. So that means there are a lot of really very, very progressive things happened. And for the young generation now, I think the internet environment and the ability to communicate across borders in real time is like air. So they do not think about that this could collapse because they take it for granted that they can send their comments and chats and all their pictures and video clips around the globe in real time. At the same time, you know, the cyberspace became a very dangerous space. So it started with the first cyber worms and cyber criminal activities already in the early 2000s. It moved into the intergovernmental military field with the Stuxnet. And what we have now is not only an exploding cybercrime with tremendous ransomware attacks, where the loss goes into the billions of dollars, but with the Ukraine war, we see now that cyber and digital tools are pulled into a real war. So that means the understanding we had in the last couple of years, also supported by a lot of academic papers, that in the conventional war with death and destruction is a thing of the 20th century, and in the 21st century, if there is a war, it will be a cyber war, which will aim at chaos and confusion on the enemy side, and death and destruction more or less has disappeared. But what I have seen now in the Ukraine war is that there is no conventional war and cyber war. A war is a war is a war. It's like in the old and new economy discussion 20 years ago. There is no old war and new war. A war is a war is a war. And this will trigger more problems in the future with on the horizon, internet-based new autonomous weapon systems. We see the role of drones now, which are, you know, using internet infrastructure. So all these are very negative tendencies. So what we have is a conflict between digital cooperation and cyber confrontation. And unfortunately, this will be the outlook for 2023. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Wolfgang, for anchoring what is ahead of us in this evolution from both policy and security and academic discussion. And as always, very insightful thoughts. I'm sure there will be quite a few questions. And thank you for sticking to 5 minutes from this, really summarizing this really impressive analysis that you published yesterday. Now we move to New Delhi. And as you will see, we are trying to bring different perspectives and to switch from traditional, let's say, a way of viewing internet governance thing to hearing from other regions where new dynamism is happening. We have with us Ambassador Asoke Mukerji, who is a person currently a retired Indian ambassador, involved in helping Indian governments on many issues, including G20, but also a person who was in the trenches of digital governance when he was permanent representative in New York. Asoke, what is for you from India's perspective, especially about this IPSA momentum, G20? How do you see 2023? Over to you.
Thank you, Jovan, and I'm really happy that I am here today. I am from the 1998 generation, having negotiated the WTO decision on moratorium on electronic commerce, but also having negotiated the Internet Technology Agreement, which made a huge difference on the ground, at least in India. It allowed us to become a software exporter. So from that perspective and the perspective of aligning the Tunis agenda with the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, I think that today, when we look at the landscape ahead of us this year, here in India, we are going to go through 3 major changes domestically. And these changes are linked to bringing a predictable transparent legal framework for India's emergence in the digital world. The first is a telecoms bill, which will replace the existing law of 1883. It's a long, long time ago that the British introduced their wireless, their laws to India. We are changing it this year. It will throw up some challenges, and I'll be happy to discuss those challenges later. The second is a Digital Personal Data Act. That's something that has been talked about. In July this year, the first draft of that will be presented to our parliament, and that will take on board issues which are topical in our discussions of privacy, especially privacy, and the role of the state and the individual. And the third legislation is called the Digital India Act, and that will update the existing law on which India has progressed from the year 2000, which is the Information Technology Act. As the minister, when introducing this, explained, the Information Technology Act didn't even have the word internet. So we can imagine what these three laws will do. Now, moving from that into the G20, India's focus is primarily going to be to bring into the G20 action plan the experience that India has had in applying the digital technologies to development. And I think that in this, there are three areas that have been identified as priorities. The first is digital public infrastructure. Now, the digital public infrastructure is going to focus on six broad areas: the economy, finance, government, health, and education. And it's going to try and show that with the use of digital technologies, we can accelerate development as well as make governance more effective and responsive. So that's the focus, and India's experience on introducing innovations like the United Payments Interface, which brings a large number of banking applications into one platform, which I can discuss again later, is going to be one of the showpieces. Along with that is digital skill. Now, this is something that is linked with the entire ecosystem of startups, of innovation, of research, of encouraging people to respond to the changing world in new ways. And I think that there too, India's experience in today, we are one of the largest sort of examples of startups in the world, is going to play a role in sharing this experience with other countries, including the G20, but even beyond the G20. And the third is a very, very strong area where we have consistently voiced our experience and our aspirations, and that is in capacity building, in digital skill development. This is something that has been a pillar for India's experience, not only inside these governmental processes, but also in the global conferences on cyberspace, the GCCS, where we hosted the last one in 2017. So these are the three priorities that I see ahead, and I'll be happy to come back to any of these issues in the session that follows. Thank you, Johan.
Thank you, Asoke. Somehow we missed something on data, but you can come later on because the chair of the Sherpa published the article putting data as a priority, but you can reflect later on it. What was interesting in your reflection was that there is a document, one of the legislation, without mentioning internet. And I advise you to read another interesting document, which is a Swedish presidency document. The Sweden took over the presidency of the European Union. Obviously, Sweden is very advanced IT economy, but in their document, there is no chapter on digital. But when you analyze, you have chapter on economy, on justice, on security. You have digital horizontally integrated. Even conceptually speaking, there is no any more dedicated digital chapter, but that's horizontal inclusion. It's an interesting shift in the language and the way of framing documents, like what you, Asoke, mentioned. We are moving now to Latin America, not physically. Marilia is based in Europe, but she's a Brazilian internet governance expert. Obviously, we are following carefully what's going on in Brazil. It's sort of high importance for the rest of the world. But for digital governance, Brazil used to be one of the key players. It organized the Net Mundial Summit in 2014. Can we expect Brazil back? And if yes, in what form? Back to the global digital governance? Marilia.
Thank you, Jovan. It's great to see so many familiar faces and names, and Happy New Year, everyone. I think that we cannot really speak of a comeback because Brazil did not leave digital diplomatic scene during this very politically shaky last years. There were some discontinuities during the Bolsonaro government, especially in areas such as human rights and gender, that did affect digital policies. But by and large, Brazil continued to be an important player in discussions such as e-commerce, cybersecurity, and also via BRICS, which made a lot of progress in terms of their coordination in recent years. To me, the question is not whether Brazil will come back, but given the recent change in government, if Brazil would be willing to take a more of a leadership role in certain digital discussions, as it did during Net Mundial. And there are some indications already. It's very early in the government, but we can see some signs that digital issues will be more important for this government. First of all, if we look at the Brazilian administration from a bureaucratic perspective, we can see in the organogram of the government that there is more attention in terms of digital, in terms of creating, for instance, a specific secretariat to deal with digital policies, which will look into issues such as media pluralism, media literacy, disinformation, fake news, which is a big issue in the country now. But at the same time, we can also see from the organogram that there's a dispersion of digital topics across different ministries and across different secretariats. One can see this as a good thing, such as in the Swedish government. However, we notice so far a lack of clear mechanisms for coordination. So there could be a danger that this could create repetition and not a healthy overlap, and that could be somewhat paralyzing to the government. But some interesting changes have happened as well in the Brazilian administration in recent times when it comes to foreign policy. If we look at the Ministry of Foreign Relations in the last years, digital issues have been finally unpacked and there are new homes for them. Before, all things digital were aggregated inside a very small division in Itamaraty, which was overloaded and understaffed. But now there are dedicated different bodies to deal with issues such as cyber and digital economy. And that is very positive because that will lead for more specialization, more depth in terms of policy development and implementation. So this was a good thing in terms of this restructuring of Itamaraty to deal with digital. Moreover, there are very positive signs that the dialogue between the government and civil society will be much better than in previous government. It has been strengthened. Brazilian civil society has been a focus of giving ideas to the government. If we think about Marco Civil, for instance, the civil rights framework for the internet, which was quite of a landmark regulation, the idea came from civil society. So who knows, maybe there are some great ideas coming from this interplay between government and civil society in these next 4 years. But if we look at the political context, I think it's very difficult to compare the moment today and the moment of Net Mundial. Inside Brazil, the political situation is very different. Brazil is immersed in a socioeconomic crisis. There is problems with rising poverty, political polarization. So there's a very heavy internal agenda that will take resources and will probably mobilize political bodies more inwards than outwards. And the global political context is also very different. In 2014, we had a very acute digital crisis, mass surveillance, Snowden revelations, which made the headlines everywhere. Now I think we are facing a potentially bigger crisis in terms of social media and the threat that this represents to democracy, and in terms of the potential fragmentation of the internet. But these crises, they are not so acute and they are difficult to pin down and to translate to the general public. They are difficult to place in terms of a political agenda with concrete results. They're difficult, but they're not impossible. So can Brazil use its soft power on digital to transform this potential crisis, democracy, fragmentation, into catalysts for action. And Brazil has a very clear interest when it comes to online democracy. It has the legitimacy to talk about that, especially after what happened in Congress. So can it take one step forward in this direction? And if it does, then which would be the best forum to discuss these issues? BRICS has been the most active mechanism for coordination on digital issues for Brazil. However, it's not the best forum to discuss democracy or fragmentation. For these reasons, I think that perhaps IBSA seems like a much more well-suited forum. IBSA had a very, very important moment of protagonism back in 2012, when it made concrete proposals when it comes to the governance of the internet and its architecture. But after that, it went in a sort of a dormant state. Unlike previous governments, Lula understands the importance of IBSA in the international scenario. So will he work to recreate IBSA in terms of its proactivity? And could this risk of fragmentation and the problem of democracy mobilize the three IBSA countries and provide them a concrete agenda? If it doesn't, then I think that another potential agenda could be what you mentioned, Jovan, the issue of the governance of data, which will be important in the G20 context, which will be something that will certainly come up in the UN summit in a couple of years. But in this discussion, the economic aspects of data governance, I think India and South Africa are more developed in terms of thinking. Brazil has discussed data governance a lot, but more from a data protection angle in the last years, because it has recently approved that data protection regulation. So maybe perhaps to summarize in a very Twitter style, Brazil, yes, more interested on digital, definitely, possibly more active too. We need to see how the political environment will evolve internally. And IBSA, still a very interesting forum for digital discussions. On Brazil's side, I think there's a very, very good opportunity with Lula to bring IBSA back. Let's see if he will do that or not. Thank you, Jovan, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marilia, for this really forward-looking summary and what we can expect from Brazil. When I said is Brazil back, I refer to the leadership role that Brazil had with Net Mundial, with the local internet multi-stakeholder structure and other issues. I will go quickly through the comments before we move to Kate Getao and the African perspective. Federico, you ask why there are no fintech perspectives in the digital trends. There is a section on digital economy, cyber currency. Yeah, there are so many issues, but we had to select 12 developments, and one can argue that probably fintech should have been the part of it. Nadia, you mentioned why Sweden doesn't have a dedicated digital chapter, and we just heard from Marilia that trends with Itamaraí, with Brazil and other countries is to streamline digital horizontally. And we heard it also from India. Therefore, I think that Sweden, with their presidency document, is basically leading this trend. Let's see what are the concrete digital or cyber aspects of justice, crime, economy, security, and other issues. And yes, they are co-leads of the Global Digital Compact negotiation together with Rwanda. It's very interesting. Also a choice and quite promising in this context. Then we had a few other comments on Africa, Smart Africa, and we will get back to the other details later on. We move to Nairobi to Kate Getao and the African perspective. What is ahead of us in 2023 seen from Nairobi? Kat.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jovan, and good day and Happy New Year to everyone. Well, Africa is a big continent to represent, but I'll try my best. Well, 2023, I think globally looks like being another challenging year. Obviously, COVID and climate change pressures have hit economies hard. And it is clear to me that in many African countries, the digital agenda has taken a slight backseat because many countries are grappling with other serious issues such as drought, increasing food prices, unemployment, and other such pressures. At the same time, we can recognize that since your key date of 1998, there has been substantial changes in many emerging African economies, where there is more investment in services, in ICT, in infrastructure, and so on. And I think that has already borne fruit because that diversification of economies has created a situation where it is helping us to weather the pressure on the traditional industries such as tourism, agriculture, and so on. And therefore, governments continue to recognize digital as a very important contributor to economies. And I'd say the trends we need to watch in Africa, firstly, there appears to be a trend towards a lot of regional unity. The free trade area, of course, is one of the success stories in this area. But we also see, recently Kenya and South Africa also made an agreement. So there's a recognition that we need to work together as the African Union, NEPAD, and other regional bodies have been pushing for many years. But this seems to be happening now. And the Smart Africa initiative, among others, is a recognition of this trend now in the digital area. South Africa, Rwanda, Ghana, a few countries are positioning themselves as leaders in this area. So I think this is a trend we must watch in 2023. But as we make these agreements, of course, it's going to become critical for cyber diplomacy and proper legal and regulatory frameworks to support the activities that will open up as a result of these regional initiatives. And therefore, I'll have a wish list rather than to say what I'm really predicting is going to happen. Firstly, I believe that there needs to be an educational response. We have several schools of diplomacy in the continent, and I believe it is time for there to be a push towards cyber diplomacy becoming a serious topic that can support the development of foreign ministries across the continent. The second is institutional responses. There's been fairly good development of legislation and rigor and regulatory frameworks, both in the cyber crime and the data privacy and protection area. And this is a good institutional response, but this also needs to be buttressed with a recognition that non-traditional ministries need to have full support of having dedicated cyber expertise within those institutions. In terms, there's also the area of infrastructure and standards, and I think, I listened to Asoke and, the plans they have in this area. And that is also true of Africa, and we know that the AU has been pushing for a more integrated approach to infrastructure development across the continent. And I believe there's going to be renewed interest in that area, again, to support the One Network area, the free trade area, and so on, that are coming up, because without that infrastructure, without the legal and regulatory area, without the institutions and without the awareness and the skills, it's going to be very challenging to protect the activities that are going to be taking place. Now, you also asked about new technologies, and I'll just briefly say that in that area, I do see that there's going to be a growth from just applying, like a lot of people invested in cryptocurrency. Of course, some of them have taken a serious hit. So I believe in a way this is going to be a good thing, because we're going to move from just adopting or trying to exploit this technology to actually contextualizing the technology and appreciating how it can be implemented to solve the actual priority issues that we have on our continent. And I think I'm near to completing my 5 minutes, so I'll stop there. Thank you, Jovan.
Thank you, Kat, as always, for a great intro and concrete suggestions on training on cyber diplomacy. What you said about existence of good documents is what was surprising discovery of our research on African digital foreign policy and diplomacy. There are excellent documents. And but the problem is lack of institutions and lack of the institutional capacity to implement them. And I'm sure that quite a few countries are looking for. We have today with us Ambassador Wexler, Benedict Wexler, the Swiss digital envoy, and I know it's Switzerland pioneer development of digital foreign policy strategy and introduction. Therefore, countries can look for these experiences. Also, we have experience from Australia, from Netherlands, from quite a few other countries. Thank you, Kat. Just one comment. I see that ChatGPT, what else, got a lot of traction from Malud, from other colleagues. We are going to have one interesting experiment. Today's session will be transcribed by advanced AI system developed by Diplo and summarized. That what we are doing in parallel to our teaching and other activities, we are experimenting with new algorithms for diplomacy. Now we move to Brussels, to Richard Valley, the journalist, EU correspondent of the Swiss newspaper Blik, and the keen observer of political, economic, technological development. If you follow French TV, you can see Richard almost every second evening on the quite a popular person in France. My daughter always says, "Oh, you see, Richard is on TV." Therefore, Richard, we are honored to have you with us here, in addition to all this French TV station. What is happening in Brussels, and what we can expect on digital and geopolitics?
Thank you, Jovan, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year. It's been said already, so I'm going to repeat it. Well, clearly from Brussels, you will not be surprised. I will come up mainly with information about pieces of legislation and pieces of norms and regulation, because this is what Brussels is for, and this is what has been discussed here in the European Commission headquarters. So if I would summarize the strategy of Brussels, of the European Union towards, let's say, the digital issues, I would use this sentence: Europe is back. That's, I believe, the sentence that summarizes what Commissioner Thierry Breton is, the commissioner in charge of digital affairs. He's French. He will be in charge until 2024, because this will be the time of a new European election. Yes, Europe is back on the digital front, and that would be true for three main items. First of all, you may have heard this word. It's coming originally mostly from France, but it's been used now very much in the European arena. It is sovereignty. Sovereignty, because of the war in Ukraine, because of the challenges that Europe is facing with the US now on the industrial area with the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, the idea of sovereignty. And I think for the first time ever, now all 27 governments of member states agree that digital policy is absolutely part of the European sovereignty. And I think 2023 will be the year when we will start to realize whether Europe meaning the European Union, has enough tools and enough strength to achieve what it wants. So the first point is bringing Europe back on the front of digital sovereignty. Then we talk about data. Where do we keep the data? We talk about the instrument. We talk about also about helping some EU company to be able to compete with American giants. The second word I will keep for 2023 is the word priorities. For the first time, I think, after the DSA, Digital Service Act, that we saw earlier, the European Union has made quite a tremendous work to define its priorities. I will send you in the chat box several key documents that were issued last year, especially the Digital Targets 2030. So there is a road now for the European Union to go in terms of digital affairs, and I think it's pretty important. Now, third is the obstacles, because you can't talk about predictions without mentioning the obstacles that Europe is facing. I see myself in 2023, three main obstacles for the European Union. First obstacle is the very same that Europe has in terms of defense. I mean, in terms of hard defense, of military defense. You've got some countries who believe within European Union that it's better to ally with the United States rather than to talk in Brussels and to unite in Brussels. It is true for hard defense. It is true also for what we may call digital defense. It is very clear that countries like Poland, for example, are not very much eager to enter into discussion with the EU towards a digital agenda. The government in Warsaw trusts more what is being done in the US. One sign of the willingness from Europe to act, I should mention, it is not only an anecdote, a diplomatic anecdote, is the recent opening of an EU mission in the Silicon Valley. You may say it should have been done far before, but it's been finally done in 2022. So first obstacle is the traditional European divide. Second obstacle is the money. When you want to move hard in digital issues, you need to invest. And there are too many fields at the moment where the European Union has to invest. It has to invest in its defense. I mean, in tanks, in whatever will be required to foster its defense. It needs to invest into its economy because the predictions, you know, are quite dire at the moment. So will Europe find the money to invest in digital affairs? And I think that will be probably part of the plan that the EU is keen to achieve in 2023, another plan of mutual debt, but it's not yet been agreed, far from there. Then the third obstacle I see is the question of, let's say, concept. And clearly on that front, you've got some countries who believe that EU should come back digital-wise through private company, through the private sector. That would be more the case for Germany. And some other countries believe it's through the public sector, and that would be more the case for France. So another traditional divide is here. So Europe is back, at least the sentence is in the air, but will Europe be able to make it concrete in 2023? I think that will be the challenge for the year to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, for an excellent summary. Three keywords: sovereignty, priorities, obstacles, and the details on the obstacles. What are the concrete? Very useful sort of, let's say, checkbook for the European Union in 2023. Now we move to the Caribbean region, and Rodney Taylor, Secretary General of Caribbean Telecommunication Union, and we ask him to reflect on definitely Caribbean region, but also small island states in this context of the mega movements and big actors and big players. Rodney, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jovan, and good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to bring a perspective from the Caribbean, and in fact, I wholly support all of the speakers before. And I would like to say from our perspective that 2023 will see greater participation in terms of the internet governance space of small island developing states. And in fact, I think we are starting off on a great footing here by having a regional perspective from the Caribbean. I think we will see this throughout other international processes within the ITU. We saw last year at the Plenipotentiary Conference a very strong showing from the Caribbean, a stronger move to work with other small island developing states, including but not exclusively, but including the Pacific Islands. Push for greater collaboration between SIDS as well and the African countries. And I think this is a good thing, and it will give more meaning to the term multi-stakeholderism. I think ICANN and any of the other organizations recognize that there are underserved groups within the organizations, within the international policy development process. And this is very important for us to have perspective from small states. There's been collaboration on things like the UN Global Digital Compact, and again, bringing SIDS perspective, but also with an emphasis on women and youth from small island developing states. We see, of course, the election of, in terms of the gender issue, the election for the first female Secretary General of the ITU in over 150 years. So maybe there are implications for how the institution is run and some of the areas that it will focus on. The current SG, former director of BDT, and place a great emphasis on youth, for example, the Generation Connect initiative. So I expect to see more of that. There will, coming out of that, also be a greater push for global connectivity. Again, the Partner to Connect, which was a big part of the World Telecoms Development Conference, a very big issue for developing countries that remain part of the biggest chunk of that unconnected global population. There will be implications for regulation of big tech and OTTs because they, in a sense, because of the innovation that they are pushing, it does impact telecommunication services, the ability for existing and traditional telcos to invest into next generation technologies because they fall out of the regulatory frameworks. And I think we'll see a greater push towards regulation of these companies, not just in terms of but in terms of the services that they offer, but also in terms of regulation of content. And maybe AI will help in terms of providing regulatory technical capacity. Cybersecurity will be an issue, continues to be an issue, and for small states with limited resources. And I believe there'll be great support from SIDS for the UN efforts because of the multilateral opportunities for participation that these institutions provide. There'll be support for UN resolutions and so on that push cybersecurity and human rights on the internet. On the geopolitical side, that's uncertain for me, but certainly small states don't play well, I would say, in global geopolitics. In fact, the founding father of Barbados, where I'm from, in his UN speech during the Cold War, said that really we are friends of all and satellites of none. We tend not to get caught up too much in the geopolitics because of our small and vulnerable state. Of course, we do have a voice and stand up for human rights and justice, but geopolitics is something on a totally different level. I would say that post-pandemic, there's a huge opportunity for SIDS, in particular with respect to digital nomads and remote work. Many companies, large companies have implemented permanent policies that allow employees to work permanently from home. Of course, some companies are reversing that, but I think the pandemic has shown us that there's a huge opportunity. I mean, this is what the internet really is about, the ability to connect from anywhere and do anything and work any place. But of course, for this, connectivity, reliable, fast, and secure is very important. And it's at the top of the list if you're thinking of a place to work remotely. It makes sense, but the pandemic has shone a spotlight on it. And again, it brings great opportunities. If you can work from anywhere in the world, why not work from a beautiful Caribbean country or a Pacific island right next to the beach, as opposed to being, stuck in a skyscraper someplace.
Rodney, we preclude, we don't allow the PR, but it's such a nice PR that you have immunity, and I can tell you in Trinidad and Tobago, especially if it is combined with liming concept, that would be a great thing. Let us know your last point, and then.
Well, that's it. I would say that that's one of the big opportunities for us as developing countries, and I hope that trend continues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rodney. What you brought the issues which are, there are so many connections in the presentation. We exhausted the list, and this toured the horizon from India, Africa, Brazil, Europe, Caribbean region. Now, before we ask our panelists to reflect on what they heard and the question, I would like to invite Sonia to give us the gist of discussion in the chat room, which I can see is very, very active. Obviously, Richard mentioned concept of sovereignty, and it immediately triggers the avalanche of comments. Therefore, that was really nice point. Sonia, over to you.
Thank you, Jovan. As you've said, there's a great discussion, lively discussion going on in chat ever since our event started. So some of the main points were about, for example, cybersecurity from Melissa saying, how can we turn cybersecurity into an enabler, and how can checks and balances can be enforced? And another question was, which regulations can be adhered to between friends and nations? Vlada addressed this, saying we have to better understand roles and responsibilities of various actors in implementing existing rules, for example, the Geneva Dialogue Project, and to explore what certain positive practices, best practices there are already out there, and maybe work on standardizing them across different jurisdictions and harmonizing legal frameworks. And of course, our participants touched upon generative AI tools such as ChatGPT, Stable Diffusion, and whether or not if they can have a lasting impact on digital governance and diplomacy. For more details, you can go back in our participants can go back in the chat, and also join the dedicated breakout rooms once the session ends to talk deeper about these questions. And another question was from Suhila Amazos was, how will the EU reconcile digital sovereignty with the concept of the open internet? And between our panelists, from Marilia to Richard, there was another question about sovereignty. How sovereign can EU policy on digital be vis-a-vis the US, especially on difficult issues such as relations with China? And she has said it seems like the war in Ukraine pushed the EU back a couple of years when it comes to independent thinking, and now the EU has to rely on the US as a protective big brother. So maybe these points could be some points to reflect on our last round with our discussions. And thank you, Jovan.
Thank you, Sonia, and for all of you making comments. As Sonia indicated, there will be this extra half an hour where we can dive deeper in specific issues. Michael Camden mentioned an interesting point on that trying the telecom operators in Europe, trying to get a bit of pie from the US tech companies. And it is one of the issues which is on the agenda also in Brussels. We are now going to our panelists. You heard a lot. You heard the comments from the audience. You heard the inputs from colleagues on the panel. Wolfgang, we'll start with you. And I know that many things, including Net Mundial and other issues, are on your mind, and you were a big promoter of these concepts. But again, we are constrained with the time. Few points from you on 2023 and what you heard so far. Over to you.
One thing, I fear that we see more of what we call now an internet bifurcation, that we have the big US-Chinese conflict, and we see around the US, we have the OECD, the G7, and on the other side, so we have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, we have parts of BRICS, and so the Chinese efforts to institutionalize the World Internet Conference is a reaction to the American initiative for the declaration of the future of the Internet. So this would be bad. The better approach is to look more into what the United Nations offers. And here we have two big things for 2023. One is to work on the Global Digital Compact. This could become a major process, not only an event or a project, a process which would mobilize the multi-stakeholder community to dig deeper into the positive sides of digital development. And then we have the very complicated project on the UN Convention on Cybercrime. So they have a tough timetable. They want to present a new universal universal treaty until August 2023. So if this would be achieved, then we would have a good balance to have more on the positive, constructive side for digital cooperation and probably less on the destructive cyber conflicts. Back to you.
Thank you, Wolfgang, for great summary. And you related to what, for example, Rodney said, that Caribbean countries are not comfortable with siding with any of the major power. And again, the UN and UN role is becoming even more important, not just as nominally important global body, but also place which can create this inclusive space and protection for small and developing countries in the case of the potential new digital Cold War. And Mark Harwell, great to have you, Mark, with us, mentioned digital commons for public good as important aspect which Tech Envoy may bring to overall the debate. Asoke, we are moving to you, and there is one point. Wolfgang mentioned Shanghai Cooperation Organization. India will also host this year the annual meeting of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Is India trying to connect various dots across different divides and maybe foster this global cooperation? Time for your comments, any comment, but I was curious about that as well.
Thank you, Jovan. I think that we need to recognize how each of these three processes you mentioned are driven. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization has a secretariat-driven process, and that secretariat is headquartered in Beijing. So I think that to expect any sort of radical movement from the part of the organization of the SCO under India's presidency is really not realistic. The G20 does not have a secretariat. And that has been the biggest challenge the G20 has faced ever since from 2008. It has taken on a political role after the financial crisis. So how do you ensure coherence? And that, I think, goes back to your point and the point that Marilia made earlier today in the panel of the IPSA. Perhaps IPSA, because the three countries which preside over the G20 are IPSA in the next 3 years. So probably there'll be some coherence, but how much of it can be implemented will depend on each member of the G20. And that, I think, brings us back to where we started, which is the United Nations. And I think that this is something that the United Nations must seize the moment. The Tech Envoy has been visiting all the countries. He has put forward his proposals. And I think in September, when we have this meeting in New York, this is the opportunity that we need to put our collective shoulders together and make the UN the primary framework for digital cooperation. Otherwise, what Wolfgang has said is the reality. There is a fracture, there is a confrontation, and that is driven by factors which are beyond digital and internet issues. Those are factors which are beyond the stakeholders. And I think in terms of India, it's useful to remember that whatever I've talked about earlier today is based on the multi-stakeholder model. And I think that that answers probably some of the questions which people may have about SCO and things like that. India is going firmly with the multi-stakeholder model. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Asoke, for this three summary of comparative between Shanghai Cooperation Organization, G20, and the UN, just to put things in the right context. We move to Marilia. We'll have to shorten intervention of our speakers in order to stay within the time frame, although I may be declared persona non grata for bad time management. Marilia, over to you.
Thank you, Jovan. My point will be really brief. I just think it is increasingly important that we build bridges between discussions on internet governance and the issue of the political economy or geoeconomics. And the discussion on fragmentation is a very good example. Ginger mentioned in the chat how discussions in the IGF were overtaken by fragmentation. But I think our main problem, at least right now, is not yet technical fragmentation, but fragmentation of markets, even be it on the side of the governments through practice such as onshoring, friendshoring, etc., be it on the side of companies who decide to deserve or underserve certain regions. And this is leading to a market that is really fragmented. So bridges are needed there. Thank you, Jovan.
Thank you, Marilia. We move to Africa, and Kate, your quick take on the discussion. Mind you, we'll have extra half an hour with most of our panelists and other Diplo experts for diving deeper into all these aspects. Over to you, Kate. Unmute.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Jovan. Now, I'd just say that 150 or 200 years ago, to go back further than your 25 years, there was exploration. Global exploration was the fashion. But this was followed another 50 years or so later by colonization. And I think there's a danger that the opportunities that have been opened up by the internet are going to be overtaken by a kind of colonization, depending on how certain regions do the legislation, as well as the behavior of the OTTs and big tech. And what Rodney said, I found resonance. So I think data governance is one of the really critical issues that needs to be understood by all governments, so that we create a fairer space where conflict is less likely, because we handle this issue correctly, and the opportunities of the internet are not followed by digital colonization.
Thank you, Kat, for introducing also this term, exploration and colonization and linking to data. Richard, you will have extra half an hour. Maybe you can just give a hint what you would like to focus in extra half an hour.
Okay. Well, I look at the different comments that were made on the European Union, and I will only take one at the moment, which is this question on sovereignty. So I repeat what Marilia just wrote. She wrote, how sovereign can EU policy on digital be vis-à-vis the US, especially on difficult issues such as the relation with China? It seems to me that the war in Ukraine pushed the EU back a couple of years when it comes to its independent thinking. It's now relying on US as its protective big brother. Susonia mentioned that too. First of all, this is the question. This is precisely the question, and this is why I said that for the European Union in 2023, the slogan, the motto will be, can Europe be back? Or Europe is back. The question, I believe, is divided into two parts. First of all, can the European Union rely only on norms and regulation when it comes to asserting its sovereignty? It did so with the Digital Service Act, but is it enough? Is it enough to regulate? Is it enough to tax? Is it enough to, let's say, force companies to respect a certain number of norms? Is it enough to achieve sovereignty? At the moment, the answer given by Commissioner Breton is no. You can't achieve digital sovereignty only by norms. And I believe this is the main new thing in the European debate, because a lot of players were either thinking or playing like having norms is enough. Now the EU realized that you should also have instruments, and in the terms of digital affairs, instruments are company, are innovation, are labs. So can the EU in a way use this decade to come from 2023 to 2030 to bounce back in terms of innovation and in terms simply of internet companies? That will be the main challenge.
Good. Thank you for this. We'll leave it for this extra half an hour discussion to dive deeper. We just move to Rodney for your quick and short reflection, and then Susonia will wrap up our very interesting debate. Rodney.
Thank you, Jovan, and I'm mindful of your time, so I want to thank you for inviting us to share our perspective from the region. I believe the issue of sovereignty, which has been coming out, it has to be redefined in the borderless digital world and that we are in, and their implications for policies outside of the internet and technology. For example, taxation. I mentioned digital nomads and how they're working in one jurisdiction and paying taxes and others. So there will be a huge impact there outside of technology issues. But thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you. And take on the Rodney's invitation for the digital nomads and visiting Caribbean region. Sonia, over to you. Thank you from my side for great comments and reflections for panelists and all of you. Sonia.
Yeah, thank you, Johan. And it was a great discussion to follow. Thanks to everyone who attended, and of course, our exceptional experts and our moderator, Johan. So, as we mentioned in the beginning, we have an extra part that will follow in a few minutes. So we're going to be using Zoom's breakout rooms future. And if you can just have a look down there, it's among the options. So we have, actually, no, the pop-up screen just came out with the breakout rooms. And here you can choose out of 6 breakout rooms. Quickly, I'll go